Oh, hey, y'all. Just here at the Cowpens National Battlefield right now. About to do a battlefield tour. We'll have some cool stuff going on in just a second, and see you soon. So, the Battle of Cowpens was a Revolutionary War battle that took place on January 17th of 1781 in what is now Gaffney, South Carolina. It's just about 25 miles 25 minutes east of Spartanburg, South Carolina. It is a battle that during the time period it took place in the later part of the war. And the result of the battle is what then started what is now known as the Race to the Dan, which was after the Battle of Cowpens. It started a series of events called the Race to the Dan. The Revolutionary War had several important moments, but in the last 2 years of the war, in my opinion, are especially important because you have battles like Huck's Defeat, the Battle of Ramsar's Mill, Kings Mountain, Musgrove's Mill, just to name a few, all of which showed that this war could be won. The Battle of Cowpens was won by the Patriots, who were against a far more superior army, the British. Of course, having great leaders will ultimately make a huge difference too. Anyways, with the Battle of Moore's Creek, the British had most certainly tried early, and were mostly unsuccessful in the southern colonies, in which also included an unsuccessful naval attack to take Charleston in 1776. In my opinion, it was these victories that were a huge boost to the Patriots' morale, and it blunted the British efforts. But regardless, by 1779 and 1780, the war in the North had started to become a stalemate, especially in the northern colonies. So the British strategists decided to look again, look at the South again, at the possibility of returning to the southern colonies and making an effort again to retake, to go into the southern colonies and making an additional effort. So they decided again to go south for several reasons, including to help the loyalists in the South and to help them regain control of the southern colonies, and then push north to regain full control of the colonies. They figured that much of the population would then join together, once they got the loyalists and once they kind of retook some of the southern, ports and colonies and stuff, that they would actually band together and then get in line. We all know how that ultimately ended up going, of course. And by 1779, 1780, the British Redcoats indeed did come south en masse, capturing first Savannah, Georgia, to Charleston, and then all the way up to the Camden in the southern, in South Carolina. And in the process of all this, they ended up defeating and capturing a large portion of the Southern Continental Army, unfortunately. And this is the 3-pound cannon that they may have used at that time. You have the warmer, then you have the rammer and sponge right there on the left side over there. And then the vent pick and all that sorts for the cannon. This is one of the muskets that they would have had at the time. Anyways, unfortunately, some of those victories that they had in Camden and Charleston and all that stuff, though, ended up giving the British the confidence, this feeling that they would soon be in control of the entire South, and that the Loyalists, also known as Tories, would then flock to the British cause. And taking control of these densely populated areas, however, gave, as mentioned, gave the British a false hope and victory that they didn't count on so much. Of course, they didn't count on having all this opposition in the backcountry. The conflict in the backcountry turned out to be their, the Achilles tendon, and causing all this trouble. And if you really think about it, the Southern campaign more so in the backcountry, could technically be called a civil war of sorts, as the population in the colonies was split between the Patriot militia and the Loyalists, who were also known as the Tories. Of course, conflicts began, which often started disputes between neighbors, families, and friends, and rekindled a lot of old feuds and disputes. So it was definitely pretty crazy. And of course, both sides then proceeded to organize militias and then started to fight each other, and the backcountry was devastated. But anyways, General George Washington proceeded to send a very capable General Nathaniel Greene to take command of the Southern Army, and after the Battle of Camden, which was after when Horatio Gates, he was taken out of command at that time, and anyway, so Nathaniel Greene took command of the Southern Army, and against what may have been considered a smart move at that time, 2 weeks after he took command, General Greene decided to split his army and send General Daniel Morgan southwest to the Catawba River to cut off the supply lines and stop the British operations in the backcountry. General Cornwallis, who was the British commander in the south, decided to counter General Greene's move by sending Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton to stop Morgan's actions. Anyways, Lieutenant Colonel Tarleton was only 26 years old at that time, but a very capable commander, and was both feared and hated, but quite a few people, even the British officers, especially the officers on the British side, hated him, just because of who he was, and, this overly confident and cocky guy comes in and starts giving everyone a hard time and all that stuff. But of course, the Patriots also didn't like him, especially after the Battle of Waxhaws. There, Tarleton was accused of not stopping the fight against the remnants of the Continental Army and, the Patriots and stuff, and when the Patriots were trying to surrender. So, according to my research, this decision was not quite popular, and ultimately led to the term as, Tarleton's Quarter, and was used against him at that time and sorts. So all that was used against him at that time. But anyways, all these events set the stage for the Battle of Cowpens. And on January 12th of 1781, Tarleton's scouts were able to locate Morgan's army at Grindle Shoals on the Packlet River in the South Carolina's backcountry. He then proceeded to begin an aggressive pursuit of Morgan. Tarleton, who was grumbling about the heavy rains and the flooding rivers, started to gain ground as his army headed toward the swollen Packlet River. But anyways, on a side note, behind us in that direction, a little ways down that way is a river that's behind us. And as you can notice, some of the terrain here is kind of offers protection to the, it offered some protections for the Patriots and sorts, and the militia, the Patriot militia, was actually very familiar. Some of them were very familiar with the general area. Anyways, as Tarleton started to get closer and close to General Morgan, General Morgan then retreated north to, I think, Burr's Mill on the Thickety Creek. On January 16th, Tarleton was reported to have crossed the Packlet River and was much closer than expected. Morgan and his army had to make a hasty retreat, and unfortunately leaving their breakfast behind. I can only imagine. But anyways, not long after, Morgan crossed and then ended up traveling west on the Green River Road. At that point, Morgan had to make a choice, because the Broad River was about 6 miles behind Morgan, and the water level was, of course, higher than usual. So Morgan decided to make a stand at the Cowpens. So you're probably wondering at this point how the term Cowpens came about. Well, it was a well-known crossroads and was often used as a grazing ground, and was associated with the early cattle industry. Hence the battle ultimately being called the Battle of Cowpens. The field itself was somewhere about 500 yards long and the same distance wide. The field was kind of I guess you could kind of call it a park per se, that was dotted with trees and didn't have much undergrowth because it had been kept clear by cattle and grazing in the spring on native, they grazed in the spring on the native grasses and sorts. What also added to the layout of the field, it also had slight rises and dips in the ground, which ultimately helped the Patriots in the battle. So I forgot to mention, this is actually, we are right where the, right here is right where the second line, which was the militia, was standing. This is the battlefield right here. So they were facing in this direction, with a line right here. So anyways, once Daniel Morgan found out about the pursuit, or found out that Tarleton was pursuing him as quickly as he was and all that stuff, he sent out word to most of the militia in the general area to join him at the Cowpens. Thankfully, much of the militiamen knew the layout of the area, as some of the over mountain men had camped in the Cowpens on their journey to the Battle of Kings Mountain. So anyways, once they got here, they made camp in a swell between two small hills, and through the night, Andrew Pickens' militia drifted into camp, and General Morgan, being the commander that he was, walked around the encampment and engaged with his men by talking about past battles and talked to the battle plan that he had, and of course lashed out against the British. So one thing to kind of note is that Daniel Morgan's words were very, very effective, especially with the militia and sharpshooters, though, because I guess in a sense he was, he grew up in the backcountry and all that sorts, and he was kind of a backcountryman, so his words were very, very effective with them. So that was pretty good to know, and definitely helped out with the morale and all that stuff, though, in building him up. And what's so interesting is that Daniel Morgan also proposed a competition with the sharpshooters and all that stuff that were in the first line, and said that, along the lines of wanting to take out the officers and see who can get more, of course, between the varying regiments with the militia. So that was pretty cool to learn. And by the time Daniel Morgan was through talking with all of his militia and all his men, and it was also noted that they noticed that the militia was in good spirits and all, and all good and all that sorts. They also said that Morgan didn't really sleep much that night.